Welcome everybody to this 2021 EUA-CDE Thematic Workshop. Our webinar this morning is on fair data management and research data in doctoral education. I hope you find this to be as interesting a session as I've had in watching the videos that are already up on the YouTube channel. So I think this will be a fascinating and interesting session. So what the topic that we are going to be looking at this morning is, in the last decade, digitalization has had a considerable impact on the way we work in everyday life. What is more, this technological advancement has also resulted in a substantial increase of data being produced worldwide. However, while the vast amount of data has brought many opportunities in many sectors, including inside academia, it has also raised questions about the necessity to analyze, preserve, share, and reuse data to make the research process more efficient. Therefore, the concept of fair data management is currently a topic of interest in the research environment, with universities being increasingly aware of the need to provide training on data-driven methods for doctoral candidates and early career researchers. As an increased number of funders require data management plans as part of their project applications, doctoral schools are also requested to train and support early career researchers in preparing such activities. This online discussion will provide a platform to address the importance of fair data management practices for early career researchers and explore whether the training offer of universities can meet the current skills needs of doctoral candidates in the field. So that introduces our topic this morning. But before we actually go to meet the presenters, I'm going to go through some technicalities of the webinar this morning. So looking at the technical, so we have a Q&A feature as well, which I will get to in a moment. But just to let you know, this session is recorded and the recording will be available later on the EUA YouTube channel. As I said earlier, the three of the sessions that we're going to hear today are already on the channel, and I strongly urge you to go and visit those and give you more information about that. And links to that will be in the handout section here on the handout feature of the webinar. So you can just search the YouTube channel for the European University Association with the title of this webinar. All those who are registered for the session will also get a link to the recording and the presentations of the speakers after it has taken place. Participants can interact through the chat where they should address any technical questions. So if you're having any technical problems, use the chat function to let the team know, and they will help resolve some of those issues for you. The Q&A tab on the webinar here today is where you can address any questions you would like to pose to the speakers as they go through their presentations. So you will see that if you want to, and there's also the option to vote for questions as well. So if there is a particular question you see that you like, you could vote for that. And obviously questions that get the higher votes will be addressed in that order. Participants can also download materials from the handout tab. So you'll see you have the handout tab there on your screen, and in there will be the handouts you can have available to you, and also the links to the YouTube channel. As I said, a great resource. I myself have viewed them and I found them fascinating to listen to. So that it takes care of all of the main technicalities for the morning, and I will now going to begin to introduce our first speaker to you today, and we will hear from Lennart. And before we hear, I'm going to introduce him to you. And then hand over to Lennart to present his input to today's session. So Lennart Stoy is a project manager in the Research and Innovation Unit of the European University Association, working on EU research policy, including open science, EOSC, scholarly publishing, research data, and research infrastructure. He's a work package leader in the FAIR's Fair Data, Fostering Fair Data Practices in Europe project, focusing on research data management skills within university curricula. Between 2014 and 2018, he helped develop the EUA Energy and Environment platform. Lennart holds a master's degree in political science from Leiden University, and before that he studied East Asian Studies at Ruhr University, Bochum, and Tongli University, Shanghai. Very interesting pathway to the EUA, Lennart. So I'm going to stop sharing my camera and stay silent for the moment and pass over to hear you and your presentation. So welcome, Lennart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, for this kind introduction. And yeah, as you already said, I work at EUA, so I'm here kind of with two hats, as many people have in their professional life, presenting the work that EUA is actually doing within the FAIR's Fair project that Barbara has already mentioned. So I could say a whole lot of things about the project during this presentation, but I will spare that because it's a very big 22 partner project that deals with fair data throughout many different aspects of this research, from infrastructure to people to certain technologies. And I will say a few more things what we do practically in this work package that I'm leading later on. But I was also asked to give a very brief introduction about fair data actually in the beginning of this session, because it's still a term that many people are not that familiar with. But if you're participating here now for the first, and here maybe about fair data for the first time, don't panic, you're not alone. You are one of the, then probably part of the people, of the growing amount of people who are familiarizing themselves these days with the FAIR principles, and you will be hopefully a bit more familiar about it later after this session. So this is, I think, also a good way to approach this. Now, to start, I wanted to say still a few words about the FAIR principles, because we kind of based this session around it, but for many people it's still a little bit vague what it means. So actually the FAIR principles are a set of principles that were at least published in 2016, mainly from actually like the life science communities, and they actually describe how data as digital objects should be stored and made available and described through certain digital tools and services. So the idea behind that is to make the large amount of data that Barbara already mentioned in the introduction better available and better reusable by following these principles that can be applied in through various means and actually in different communities with different standards as well. Now, much of the FAIR principles are actually quite technical. I highlighted a few words in there. I won't go through it in detail, but they focus on a technical infrastructure such as repositories and, for example, unique identifiers, and also the role of metadata in enabling FAIR data. And if you look at that, actually, you will see that not all of this needs to be fully understood by the average researcher. Just to start, I think, with this statement as well. But researchers need to actually, in my opinion, need to know how to use certain services and how to design their research processes, or how to do certain steps in the research process that enables FAIR data later on. And that is especially in the I and the R, so the interoperability and the reusability, in my opinion, because that is something where actually researchers themselves need to evaluate what does interoperability mean of a data set that you have collected in one research project in field A, and then maybe link it to the data collected by research project B in the same field, maybe on the same topic. And there, the question is how to make it really reusable. That's a very pertinent one. Now, and this is also where communities need to be active. So I think some of the handouts that have been added to the session also explain this in much more detail. And I don't want to go into all this because it would be a very technical discussion. Now, where where this leads is actually that FAIR in the end needs a system of policies, infrastructures, and technologies, and the people to enable fair data. This is no rocket science. This is not too different from other technologies, but it's also important to highlight that actually making data fair is not just the burden of a single researcher. I think that is actually impossible, but it's to make clear what is actually the expectation of individual researchers or research groups, and how can they contribute to making their data fair. So for me, this is actually a lot about following good research data management practices. So when we discuss fair data and what it means for researchers, I think the focus should often be more about supporting researchers in or training them in research data management approaches that makes data fair, kind of as an outcome of this process, instead of telling researchers just to make data fair and then kind of leaving them without that. So they need institutional support, guidance documents or policies as well, and professional support for sure in terms, for example, data stewards and data managers, and also the communities of researchers in specific fields or domains. They need to actually work together to fill some of the aspects of the FAIR principles with life. And all of this needs a supporting infrastructure that is certainly not necessarily in the hand of an individual researcher, but often in form of research data infrastructures or repositories. And to say a few words as well, why to make data fair? Why do research data management? There are a whole bunch of reasons that you can mention. They are, for example, quality assurance of research. So, for example, the peer review of papers with underlying data, reproduction, visibility of publications, for example, with data sets. The reuse of data is supported by FAIR and by the FAIR principles, and that's, I mean, the intention behind them, and linking actually data sets with data from maybe other disciplines or other sources that was not originally the intention of the data, but through the FAIR principles this is enabled, and, for example, allows the reuse of certain data by other researchers to answer similar or also different research questions, but also, for example, by private organizations if the data has been made available with a license for that. In the terms of recognition and rewards, we're certainly in the first steps, but we also, at least at EUA and many other organizations, we try to open up the assessment processes or the criteria that are being used in there, and actually recognizing that producing good data and managing this is a part of scientific practice, is a first step to also include this, for example, in assessment procedures and the different policies that organizations have, for instance. And finally, accountability is also something that is often mentioned for data management and fair data, as well as open data, which is a little bit one kind of dimension of accessibility to data. But public funders, for instance, always say that, yeah, this is public money being spent on research. So actually the reuse of the data generated through a research project should be made available through various formats with the highest possible amount for reuse. And we also have a funder in the session, so maybe it's not a public one, but a philanthropic one, but maybe there will also be a few words about that. And practically, this will also be now mandated in Horizon Europe, so there's actually no way around, especially if you get European funding within the next framework program. And this is not just me talking about it, but there are many different developments in the field of research data. And just this year, there were some, there was at least one, or I think two very high-level retractions of papers on COVID-19 that really showed yet that the accessibility of data is an issue in this area, or at least for these papers. That was definitely something that showed that data availability to check papers is quite important, but also the efforts to link data, for example, in the fight against COVID-19 that has been done, and I'm exemplifying this here with some schematic from the Research Data Alliance, is a really good example of the need for fair data to combine sources across the different areas in biomedical science, for instance, because that was not really the case before. And this is really an international, interdisciplinary effort that really uses the FAIR principles in practice. Now, what does it mean for doctoral education? This is kind of a step that is, in my opinion, very important in advancing fair data in the long run, because in the end, doctoral education is where researchers really learn how to do research in their field. This is where you also where you learn really hands-on the practical skills and need a certain level of awareness of, for example, fair data to apply this later. And this is the stage where you are exposed to this and maybe trained hands-on these topics. So in my opinion, data management should be something that's more mainstreamed in disciplinary practices and interdisciplinary practices as well, because that's the idea behind it, and should just become a more normal aspect of the research process. And I think doctoral education, because it trains the next generation of researchers, is essential in facilitating this step. So practically, this is also something that we discussed with partners and other universities in the project, that this needs to be also linked with research integrity, for example, or certain research methods courses that you would do anyway in doctoral education. So this is a relatively easy step to tap it on into existing offers. And when we serve, this is not a long-term shift as well. I would just need to emphasize that we're not expecting every university to do this within the next year, that every doctoral candidate, for example, has done this, but this is really a level where long-term shift is needed and has probably the most impact, especially if you look at the numbers of doctoral researchers. I just checked this like a few days ago, and there seem to be almost 700,000 doctoral researchers in the EU-27. So this is a very large amount of the research workforce right now, and of course in the future. So it's also just in numbers, it's important that this is addressed there, because this will really have kind of a generational effect, I think, on how research is done. And this can also increase incrementally over time. So this is also something that needs to be said, that we cannot expect change to happen overnight, especially where communities need to really work on developing their own standards. Now, just some work that we did in Fairs Fair, we collected some numbers of what universities are doing, and it shows, we asked about, like, how do you actually train your doctoral candidates? What is addressed in the programs that you offer, for instance, or in the doctoral schools? And there we see that data management skills are much less covered so far than, for example, data analytics and legal aspects of research. So these data analytics is the first bar that you see here, and the legal is the second to last, and all the other topics such as data management, what is metadata, data integration issues, data quality, and interoperability are just less covered. I mean, to say they are addressed, but let's say there is some space for improvement. They are to increase at least the green bars in this chart, where this is usually addressed to a higher extent. In my opinion, this is a good target. And we are also not alone with this. Actually, doctoral education fares pretty good in terms of how these things are addressed compared to the bachelor and master level. But also universities perceive the highest need to increase this at the doctoral level. So here you can see, I highlighted the doctoral level, but we asked the same questions: what universities want to strengthen actually in the future. So their doctoral education is definitely the level where, as practical skills, these things such as data management are really perceived as a very high need to strengthen. So we had almost 90% of the respondents saying that that they would like to strengthen data management. And this is a little bit where Fairs Fair comes in, just to say a few words about what we're doing in the project before we go for the discussion. So we are working actually on defining certain competences and skills, and also the levels at which they can be acquired. So, for example, what should a master or doctoral student know about fair data and research data management? So in terms of awareness or even practical implementation, we're working on vocabularies for that, and work together with different training initiatives to kind of align these efforts as well. And some other partners are also providing hands-on training, for example, for data stewards. And actually this year we will be working on a training handbook for fair data, and we will also include some projects that work at the doctoral level, and later do also some capacity building. So if if anyone here, maybe in the audience, is interested in joining that, or even has maybe some good practices to show, this would be definitely very interesting for us as well, because we know many initiatives, but it's still a very, let's say, fragmented field across Europe. So this is definitely something where we also are always happy to engage with more partners and organizations. And finally, we also want to highlight some good practices, because that's always a good way to inspire organizations to how to approach these questions practically. And yeah, actually, this has been my presentation. So if you are interested in knowing more about the project, just go to the website, check out what we're doing in this regard. And yeah, I'm looking forward to questions and the discussion later on.
Thank you, Lennart. And I just to keep us to time, I may just move us along to the next speaker. And I think you very nicely opened up for us, particularly pointing us towards that this is a paradigm shift and will take time. And I think hopefully we'll be able to pick up how we might be able to embed that into doctoral education in the broader discussion later. So thank you, Lennart. So I'm going to move us to our next speaker in this webinar, and I'd like to introduce Ellen Schnangerland, who is a senior advisor for open science at the University of Oslo Library. She had been working with open science related topics since 2003 at the Universities of Bergen, Cambridge and Oslo, engaging in work on open science publishing, institutional repositories, and research data management. Ellen is currently leading the University of Oslo Skills Development Project for research data management, alongside contributing to strategic and policy-related work in the University of Oslo Research Data Management Group. While in Oslo, Ellen has co-organized several iterations of Research Bazaar, facilitating delivery of a number of courses in various research-related technologies. She has also contributed to the development of the growing software carpentry community in Oslo. She is also involved in discussions regarding national training and outreach work for research data management through her engagement with the Norwegian Research Data Alliance node. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from Ellen. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Let's see, just move some slides here. I thought I'd start with just a couple of facts about the University of Oslo, so you have a better understanding of my my daily context. It's by Norwegian standards a fairly big institution. We have 27,000 students, 3,000 PhD candidates, and 3,800 academic members of staff. So there's quite a lot of people to work with. And as you can see, we have 8 faculties that cover quite a wide range of academic disciplines. So it's quite a complex organization to work in. Let's see. Now that brings me to the topic of today, fair data management and research data for young researchers. We has had a data management policy and guidelines since 2017. And the fact that data should be fair and ideally also open is emphasized in the policy. But that being said, working with fair data can be quite demanding, and there are a few obstacles, at least seen from my point of view. And I thought I'd work through some of those here. The first one is to do with competencies and skill levels, because they need to improve. We have conducted some survey work throughout our institution, and we see that skills vary quite considerably amongst the young researchers and also actually across the academic community in general. And working in a fair way does require, as Leonard also indicated, a fair amount of technical insight. And we saw through our studies a particular challenge there for some young researchers, because in some areas there are a generation gap between PhD candidates and their supervisors, in that the young researchers need to use new tools and technologies in order to stay innovative and relevant in their research. And these the supervisors never had to use, and therefore never learned. And in small research groups, this can become a problem, because the young PhD candidate are kind of on their own to figure out what tools to use, and so forth, and learning how to use them as well. So that's quite a big hurdle we see for some people in Oslo. And making data fair will also require changes in research practices and methods for many disciplines as well. In some fields, we see that a lot of change has already taken place, but in other areas, there's quite a lot of work that remains to be done. And a big hurdle there is also cultural. And that, from my experience working with open science and open access for many years, is perhaps the biggest job that needs to happen. Actually, persuading people that this is a good idea, and making people see their benefits, not just for the EU and the institutions, but also for themselves, because there are a lot of potential benefits for the researchers. And also, last but not least, and a well-known issue is that the infrastructure to support making data fair aren't quite in place for many disciplines. Although, as Leonard indicated, there's a lot of work going on in that landscape. So talking about UiO, we're doing a number of activities. Barbara mentioned the UiO Skills Development Project for Research Data Management that we set up in late 2017. This is a project really following up on recommendations related to skills challenges within the institution. And the project we're targeting pretty much everyone involved in research within UiO, including research support staff, not just the researchers themselves. And when I say research support staff, I mean research administrators, librarians, and also to some extent local IT staff. And of course, young researchers are an important group here. And when we started up, we developed a series of quite general one-day courses that we ran at a faculty level for both researchers and research support staff, and young researchers were also invited to these. These are quite basic and has a very much an introductory feel, and they will likely end in their current form when the projects end by the end of this year, partly because we see that taking a full day out of training is too much, in particular perhaps for busy researchers. And it's taken quite a lot of time, but we worked our way through most of the university's faculties. Although I must confess, when COVID kicked in March, we were in the middle of quite a big series of courses, and we basically had to take a time out and sort of do something else while UiO was converting the rest of its teaching to the online format. So we're therefore kicking off activity now at the last few faculties, so the medical faculty, dentistry, and also law as well. And when COVID hit, we therefore moved to another sort of item on our to-do list, which related to looking at training for PhDs and young researchers. And in collaboration with academic librarians from the Science Library, and with support from the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences PhD team, we were able to run a series of online courses for young researchers. And these were uncredited, and they complement a 3-hour mandatory session, which our Science Library colleagues deliver on publishing and data management as part of the faculty's PhD introduction course. The format, with the pandemic restrictions we had, we ended up working these in sort of 90-minute Zoom sessions, where we ran 45 to 60 minutes lectures and then 30 minutes Q&A. And that's kind of worked quite well. We're trying to sort of bring more activity into the format, but it's worked reasonably well. And we will continue working with colleagues in the faculty and aim to deliver courses also over time, which align with other teaching activities taking place at the PhD level, for example, in introduction and completion seminars. And this example illustrates how we want to continue this work over time, where the data management team collaborate with academic librarians who are trained in the disciplines, and also local faculty or departmental staff. And the form of future courses will depend on local needs, and we will probably be tailoring them more also to disciplinary needs. And we're currently in conversations with colleagues also at the medical faculty and the social sciences faculty to expand on existing PhD introductory or ethics courses to include content on data management. And of course, the ultimate goal is to embed research data management training in master and PhD programs across the institution. Alongside that, we also aim to build up a separate portfolio of courses through the library's new Digital Scholarship Center. And young researchers are a primary target group for the services provided by this center. It's still being established and will provide both one-on-one guidance services in addition to training and courses. And there we plan both to run introductory courses in data management, but also we want to do more tailored one depending on what the community needs. And for example, now we're looking at providing a DMP writing or data management plan writing course, which a lot of people are asking for. And the center will have quite a broad remit, so it's not just focused on data management. It will provide support and training for researchers to improve digital research skills in general. And the courses we are planning will sit nicely alongside training in digital research skills, such as software carpentry courses and also code refinery courses. So they complement each other quite well. We also hope to have time, because time is flying really fast, we see, to create some e-learning modules on selected topics that will work well for communication in a sort of online forum. And we're also working on an infrastructure project now, setting up, which is a collaborative project with IT, the library, and the research administration, where we will have or get solutions for creating fair metadata in place, and hopefully that will be not too much effort for people. And that's really everything I thought I'd say at the moment. Looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And I think you gave a really excellent example of some very good practices and how it's operating within your university. And I'm sure lots of the audience members here will have questions for you, I'm sure, later on once we come to the end of the presentations. And I hear your plea for persuading people that this is a good thing to do. So I completely concur with you, but it's getting colleagues again to understand how to do it and the value to both themselves as researchers and their institution. So thank you. So I'm going to move us along with that to our next speaker. So our third speaker this afternoon. I'm going to introduce you to Mustafa Munir Sharaf, who is the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, the MCAA. He was a vice chair of the association between 2018 to 2020, now chair. He is a nanotechnology researcher with over 10 years of working experience in academia in Austria, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Previously, he worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the European Research Council, funded project at TU Wien before that. And over the years, he has worked at the Austrian Science Fund, the Austrian Research Promotion Agency, the Maria Slovatska Curie Action, and other national and international projects. His efforts and achievements have won him several international awards. His expertise includes science diplomacy, entrepreneurship, career planning for researchers. In recognition of his efforts, he has been invited to organize sessions and speak at international events such as the World Science Forum, European Open Science Forum, European Research and Innovation Days, and Vitae Research Development Conference. He also provides training on career paths for researchers at universities and research institutions. So I look forward to hearing to Mustafa and the work that's being done. So thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Barbara, for the invitation and very nice introduction. And I would like to thank the organizer and European University Association for inviting MCAA in this conference. So today we would like to give you the overview of the researchers, what researchers are actually thinking about the FAIR data. It complements very well with the Leonard's presentation just during the first one. So before we move to the original discussion, just a bit background about Marie Curie Alumni Association. It is an international nonprofit based in Belgium. We have over 17,000 members from 143 countries. So we have geographical chapters spread across different continents. We are mainly working, providing career development opportunities for our members and wider research community, at the same time working, shaping the future of science policy. So a question may arise why MCA as an organization cares about fair data. It's because, as I said, we do have researchers from different continents, different career stages. If you look at that, we have a very good ratio of early career researcher, established researchers, and senior researchers. So if we want to implement fair data in research community, MCAA is probably an organization to start with. In order to find out what our members, as well as wider research community, think about fair data, we developed a very simple survey of 50 questions. The survey is still online, and the link would be available in the chat. You can fill it out and you can take part in it. The final result of this survey would be available in the upcoming MCAA conference between March 5th and 7th. Please keep an eye for the registration. In this survey, we asked what are the perspective of researcher in terms of the fair data. So just a brief demographic, about 9.6% researchers here who took part in the survey were not member, actually 25%. And then there was a good ratio between male and female. And so does the employment sectors. You could see that the university and research institutions are the one researchers coming from who filled out the survey. Now, when we move to the survey responses, our first question was how familiar researchers were about this topic, what you could see, starting from the basic concept of FAIR principles up to the different steps. And then Plan S, the European Open Science Cloud, and Open Research Europe. You could see that even the basic concept of FAIR principle were somewhat known by the researcher, but when we go more deeper or the different steps, you could clearly see that either the researchers didn't hear about them or they didn't have any proper information. What was a bit disappointing for MCAA, and I'm sure for some of the speakers, is that for over the past years, MCAA was a vocal supporter of Plan S, and we are actually one of the part of the monitoring task force. About 45.3% respondents said they have no idea what Plan S is, and this tells you that we need to work more harder to inform the wider researcher community. And then, of course, we also asked them how familiar or what are the training they have received so far from their institutions. So this is again how much training they have received on FAIR principle, data management plan, data backup and storage, and data ownership. And you could see that over 50% have received no training, simply no training from their institutions. So I think as an organization which is representing European universities, European University Association should take this into account and ensure that there is at least the training provided by the universities or institutions on this basic principles of fair data and data management. And this is also true when we come to the data ethics, open access, and data sharing and repositories. So this training, and the respondent who said that they have received no training, we also asked them what are the training they would like to receive. Is it a basic training, which would be a course between 3 to anything less than a day, or a extensive training, anything more than a day, or a continuous training? And you could see that most of the respondents were actually more interested for basic training and then following the continuous training as a long-term plan. And then we have also asked them that when they are analyzing, just going into a bit deeper into the topic, when they're analyzing others' data, other research published data, how difficult it is to find the data, to access the data, and the interoperability and reusability. You could see that finding the data or accessing the data may not seem as difficult It's quite easy. However, when it comes to the interoperability, reusability, which, as Leonard mentioned, varies depending on the topic to topic, are real problems. The survey was actually quite long. I haven't presented the details here. We will, as I said, we will actually give you the details results in the annual conference. But these are the barriers where the respondents say that they have experienced during the application of FAIR data. Either the benefit was not clear enough, they didn't have enough knowledge, but most interestingly, institution policy, funding agency policy, or supervisor do not encourage it. And as an early career researcher, a lot of the respondents say that they have fear of career progression, that this will be seen as a negative point in their research assessment, which is something we all need to take into account when we address that. Just to give you the glimpse what researchers said also, here are some direct quotes. And one quote, the first quote, says that if we want the research to practice this, so there should be a more flexible or adjustable guideline. Otherwise, this will create additional stress on researchers. I think you were aware that there are a lot of initiatives right now dealing with the mental health of the researcher. So the researcher does not want the FAIR data to cause another extra hassle for them. Then there was a MSCA co-found fellowship program manager who commented that the FAIR data training was very basic. There should be more training at PhD level. The third was the interoperability. Maybe it seems nice in a paper. However, the whole research community, based on the topic, of course, needs to actually agree on the standard, which is, of course, very important. Last but not the least, where one researcher says that he is from a world-renowned research institute, over 2,000 researchers, and he has never heard of FAIR data. And here I could relate to my personal experience. I was in an academic institution where we have more than 7,000 members. I worked in that institution more than 7 years. Early career researcher up to the senior researcher position. I have never heard in my 7 years anything about the FAIR data. Though I know that later on, when I was actually preparing this presentation, I found out that the institution was actually part of a couple of global initiatives, but there was simply no training for the early career researcher or the senior researcher. So that tells you the problem, that tells you what are the different stakeholders take into account. And if I can point out three major point, it would be to offer necessary training in all different career stages, as well as the research administrator, how they can support the researcher. And we need to encourage and provide incentives researchers to use that. This should not be, they should not have the fear of career progression by if they use the FAIR data. And of course, there needs to be more institutional and infrastructure support. With this, I would also like to invite you to take part in this survey. It is still open. And I thank you all and invite you to join the MCA annual conference between March 5th and 7th. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Mustafa, for taking us right down into the experience of individual researchers. So I think that really adds very nicely to the previous two presenters, particularly outlining some of the barriers and the difficulties, which hopefully we will get to discuss a little bit further when we come to the main discussion. So thank you very much, Mustafa. So I'm going to move us to our final speaker before we open up to our question and answers session. And the final speaker in this webinar this morning is David Carr. David is a program manager for open research at the Wellcome Trust and helps to drive Wellcome's effort to maximize the availability and use of research outputs, including data, publications, software, and materials in ways that will enrich the research enterprise and accelerate the delivery of health benefits. Prior to this, David was a policy advisor at the Wellcome, where he led on work to develop and communicate Wellcome's policy in areas including open science, biosecurity, and genetics. Through his work, he has played a key role in shaping Wellcome's policies as a funder and in taking forward work in partnership with others to support and champion open research. So I look forward to hearing David and the role of the funder in this area of FAIR data. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. First thing, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. That's such a relief. I'm sorry, everyone, that you can't see me today. I'm having internet connection issues. So hello, as Barbara said, I'm David Carr. I'm Programme Manager for Open Research at the Wellcome Trust. And I'm just going to say a few words very briefly to introduce our perspective as a research funder on data sharing and FAIR data. And then I'll very briefly talk to some of our key priorities as a funder, particularly focusing around early career researchers. So for those who might not know Wellcome, we're a global research foundation. We're dedicated to supporting science to solve the most urgent health challenges facing everyone. And as a research funder, it's absolutely vital to us that the outputs of the research we fund, including publications, data sets, software, materials, and a whole range of other valued outputs of research, can be accessed and used in ways that will ultimately maximise the benefit to health and society of the research we support. So as such, Wellcome has been quite a very passionate and advocate, champion and advocate of open access to research publications and research data sharing. And we have sort of long-standing policies, expectations in place for our researchers in those areas. I won't go into this in detail, but I thought it was important to just say a few words very briefly about why opening up access to research data is kind of such a key and growing priority for us as a funder, and indeed funders more broadly. So opening up access to data can really amplify the benefits of research through enabling it to be accessed and used in ways that might never have been anticipated by those who generated those outputs in the first place. It's vital to ensure that published claims can be appropriately validated and replicated. And there's a real potential role for widening access to data in terms of reducing unnecessary duplication and avoidable waste in the research enterprise. And indeed, there's potential for data and other outputs to be potentially used by a whole range of different types of users beyond researchers, including policymakers and the broader public. So for these reasons, I think that, or I'd argue that the appropriate management and sharing of data and other outputs in a sort of responsible and timely way is really becoming increasingly seen as sort of a core element of kind of good practice as a researcher. And really the key thing to put across in this, and as you'll have seen from the previous presentations, perhaps this argument isn't one yet, but really sort of adopting these things is something that really sort of throughout the course of a research project is something that really enhances value both to the person doing research as well as to the broader community. So often I think it's argued that managing data effectively is vital because the main person you might want to reuse your data later on is yourself, and managing the data effectively through this research process can avoid a lot of problems later down when you come to report and publish. So a quick word around kind of sort of funder commitment in this area more broadly. So over the last few years, I think there's been an increasingly strong drive from research funders to support data sharing and open research more broadly. And really a sort of increasing sort of coming together as funders and looking at how we can work together to support the research community. There are still, I think, quite a lot of differences in detail between different funder policies around research data, but I'd say at the high level there's quite a high degree of sort of consistency around our expectations. So I think at a high level there's increasingly an expectation on the researchers we fund to share data with as few restrictions as possible. And I think absolutely crucial to ensure that data and indeed software underlying published research findings is accessible at the point that research is published, so that other researchers can properly scrutinize those claims. We recognise, and I think this relates to a question that was that I saw in the Q&A. There's a strong recognition that not all data can be shared completely openly, and that sometimes limits on data sharing are absolutely essential. So I think everyone's moving towards this mantra. I think that was originally coined by the European Commission, that data should be shared in a way that's as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And then across funders, I think there's an increasing requirement for data management plans to be produced as part of funded projects from an early stage. Some funders, like us, require that as part of funding applications. Others require it on project initiation. But I think it's been seen as having a clear plan in place for how you'll manage and share data and other outputs from the outset of the project is increasingly becoming a sort of standard expectation from both funders and institutions, I'd say. We've heard a bit about the FAIR principles already. I think they're very much gaining increasing traction amongst funders as a means that we're sort of as a kind of element that we're increasingly introducing in our policies around data sharing and open research. And really describing the features that data should have to enable it to be accessed and reused effectively. However, I think there's a recognition amongst funders, and I'll come back to this in a second, that there's a lot more work to be done to put these principles into practice. As we saw from the staffers talk, they still haven't permeated particularly widely into the research community, and there's a lot more work to be done to actually for practicing researchers. To give practicing researchers actual guidance on how sort of expectations of FAIR should be put into practice. I just wanted to talk briefly to some of the high-level areas of work and priorities that Wellcome is taking forward as a funder to support our research communities and early careers researchers in particular. One thing that we're actively doing is around trying to sort of support our researchers in developing more effective data management plans. Wellcome calls them outputs management plans because we require plans that relate to all outputs that are generated by the research, but it's basically the same concept. So apologies if I slip in terminology between the two. So one thing that Wellcome's done in particular is worked actively to develop our guidance and try to provide more specific guidance for the researchers we fund around the expectations of where they might deposit their data and that type of thing, and the timelines and those kind of elements. But we've also just launched a new pilot to work with both our funded researchers and our funded research institutions to work more actively with them to enhance the quality of the plans, of data management plans, where issues have kind of and questions around the plans have been raised as part of the funding review process. So we actively offer to work with the researchers we fund to strengthen their data management plans and make them more specific during the first few months of the project, and then actively encourage them to iterate those plans as the research progresses. So I mentioned the FAIR principles already. We're very keen as a funder to work to look at how we can support the research community in implementing the FAIR principles and work to build consensus amongst funders. One thing that we're doing is developing a cross-funder project, still in the early stages, but which we're calling Fairware. And the idea of that is to explore the development of kind of automated tools that can support both researchers and funders in terms of implementing the FAIR principles, and really try to sort of embed those principles more in the way researchers work through developing tools that sort of fit with their workflows. And that's something I'm happy to talk more about if that's of interest. We're working actively to try to support key resources that the research community need to make data fair. And also, and this very much follows on from previous talks, to work very actively to try to ensure that that the sharing of high quality data and other outputs openly is given sort of genuine credit and recognition as kind of a research output. And that's something that we're working actively with global initiatives such as the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, and actively trying to actively trying to work with research institutions as a funder to put firmer expectations in place around the need to develop research assessment practices to recognise a full range of research outputs. We're also working to try to develop innovative tools and platforms to support open research practices. A particular example there is the Welcome Open Research Publishing platform, which we've established to allow researchers to rapidly and openly publish a whole range of different types of research outputs, from software to protocols to registered reports and a whole range of other things, hopefully ensuring that that researchers are kind of motivated to report those outputs and ultimately get credit for them. To pick up on the theme in previous meetings, I think based on what I've said, I firmly believe that training and managing and sharing data should be a really vital element of doctoral training and ongoing researcher training. I think as a funder, it's something that we've discussed our role in, and we in general don't think it's necessarily our role to determine exactly what that looks like, and certainly not to deliver it directly. I think that's something that we think institutions that we support to take the lead on, but it is something that I think as a funder we should actively encourage and support those we fund, and provision funding and grants for them to sort of get the training that they need to deliver their research, including around sort of responsible data management. And that we can have a role across our funding and across the institutions we fund in bringing people together and sharing good practice potentially as well. A shameless plug for 2 bits of ongoing work we're taking forward that I thought might be of interest to this audience. The first thing is that we've just launched the 3rd round of a funding competition called the Open Research Fund. This supports innovative projects aimed at fostering open research. And for this round of the call, we've got a specific focus around incentives for open research. So if you have an idea for an approach to better incentivize and drive culture change around fostering open research practices in your institution, in your discipline, or more broadly, please do come to us, and there's funding available to support work to sort of pilot and evaluate those types of approaches. The second thing I just wanted to very briefly mention is our Welcome Open Research Publishing platform. We've established a dedicated early career advisory board for that platform to really try to ensure that the views of early career researchers are kind of integral as we develop that platform. Indeed, we think there's a whole range of benefits of that platform for early career researchers in terms of getting outputs out there and building publication profile and that type of thing. And we've just been working with that at our early career research advisory board to develop a campaign around data sharing. That's produced a whole range of resources, tips and perspectives around kind of good practice and issues to consider and that type of thing. And I think that's well worth checking out if that's of interest and seeing if it's something that would be of value to yourself and researchers that you work with, and the links on the slide there. I will stop there. I'm looking forward to taking any questions or discussion. Yeah, been great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. So that concludes our presentations. So I'm going to invite each of the presenters to turn on their cameras, and we will enter our discussion phase. I know, David, you may not be able to do so, but we will know you were there. So thank you. So thank you very much to all our speakers. And we have around a little over 10 minutes, which is not a lot for discussion, but however, we will move to that. And we have in our question and answer section of the webinar here, I'm going to go through the questions as they come with those who got the most votes, if that's okay. So the first one actually is for Ellen. And Ellen, the question is, how in practice did you develop the training, both e-learning modules and for in-faculty training? Did you have to rely on external experts? Was the expertise already present in the faculties or in institution? And did you collaborate with other institutions? So obviously, and that's from Judith Bernot, one of our attendees today.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I should just say we haven't so far had time to do anything on e-learning because there's always so much live training to do. We did it ourselves, but did a lot of research and were inspired, amongst other things, by the CESTA Data Management Expert Guide that you can find online. I might be able to post a link to that later on. That was really helpful in sort of helping us structuring the sort of topics, and we also reused some of their sort of concepts in our training sessions. We started talking about data management already in 2015. So we'd been out sort of talking about data management. We kind of had a good idea of where the key topics that needed to be touched upon were. And over time, we've actually developed this series of modules. I think we have 12 different modules that sort of, when we go out and speak to people at the faculty level, they can sort of pick and choose a little bit what they want us to focus on. We, for example, provide a lot of training for master level courses as well, and privacy and data protection is very, very big there. Certainly for the social science faculty, where we're teaching next week, for example. And yes, we try to collaborate with everyone. We try to collaborate across the institution. So we work a lot with our central IT department and also the research administration, and we have a sort of consistent conversation going on there. We also have established a network of data management, data stewards, really, or data managers, and so people who work with this out in the faculties and departments, because there turned out to be quite a lot of people when we sort of started outreach on that, and they also got a great network to connect with each other, because quite a few of them were quite lonely. So I think collaboration is key. Once we start moving towards covering more advanced topics and perhaps also more technological topics, it will become even more important to collaborate with colleagues with that expertise. EU also has a new data science center starting up, and we expect to also try and bring them on board, and hope to be able to set up joint training with them, for example. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, and I'm sure, no doubt, you will have people maybe connecting in with you when you have demonstrated your expertise in this area. And one, we can hear from all the speakers, one, the importance, but in many cases, the gaps that we have in our institutions, both for our researchers and for our early career researchers and PhDs. Now, I'm going to move to the next question, and this is, it can be for all of you to think about, how does FAIR data deal with confidentiality of some data, even when anonymized? You know, this is, maybe I might go to Lennart firstly. Maybe you'd like to pick up on that one. I think Lennart is, as we're waiting for Lennart, maybe if Ellen, if you want to pick that up, because to some extent you began to slightly touch on that when you talk about some of the work you be doing with the social sciences, so that may be a space where they're particularly interested in that.
I think the key thing to focus on is that, or to remember, is that FAIR doesn't necessarily mean that data should be shared openly. There's pressure. There are different levels of sharing. You can share metadata without sharing the data. You can also share the data in a controlled fashion. So, for example, we have the Norwegian Center for Research Data. They provide a service for social science research, primarily in Norway, where you can deposit your data set and then people can apply to get access. So there's controlled procedures in place. So there are different levels, but we never compromise on privacy matters, because obviously the case here was health research. I saw someone was touching upon health research, and of course we cannot make that open accessible without solid anonymization, certainly with the landscape being as it is currently. So FAIR is only as possible, as far as possible. So as open as possible, as close as necessary, as I think David mentioned, which is really an important thing to keep in mind here.
Thanks. Lennart, did you want to follow in on anything on that in relation to?
I cannot really add much more. That is really the question that happened, that I think people get all the time about FAIR data, and it's to say actually FAIR data I think has been picked up a lot, at least in policy, because it does not say that you must open data. So that's why I think, for example, in Horizon Europe, they've said, okay, we want fair data as open as possible, as close as necessary, as opposed to, for example, the open data pilot in Horizon 2020, where you say, okay, actually making data open by default is much more a problematic issue for sensitive data than actually making it accessible in different ways that are maybe fit to the level of sensitivity of the data. So, yep.
And David, if you're still with us, from a funder's perspective, did you want to comment particularly, because I know Wellcome Trust would obviously deal with a lot of data that would probably be considered confidential in terms of the projects that are funded. So did you want to maybe add anything further? Or do you feel we've kind of covered that topic sufficiently?
Oh, no, I mean, I thought those two responses covered it off. I really don't have a lot to add to that. Yeah, I mean, I'd only emphasise obviously as a funder of medical research, a lot of the research we support can't be shared completely openly. That doesn't mean, as the others have said, that it can't be sort of documented appropriately so that it can be reused and made accessible under sort of and often made accessible under sort of controlled managed access provisions. So yeah, I think that's, as Leonard said, one of the attractions of FAIR is that it can apply to both data that's shared completely openly and data and ensure that data that can't be shared openly is documented effectively in a way that it can be reused subject to appropriate access conditions. So.
Okay, and we have a specific question for Leonard. Is there anything planned for a European FAIR data label similar to the HRS for researchers, which is a good practice in recruitment?
To my knowledge, this is not being discussed. There used to be a discussion about like an open science label for institution, but I think this has not resulted in a specific outcome. And I think it's also what we discuss here, FAIR data. In the end, the principles were published in 2016. So I can understand that, Mustafa, 7 years ago when you started, you cannot have heard about this, and institutions cannot have heard about this. So we're really in the infancy of the adoption of this concept. This being said, there's some work on actually measuring fairness, so FAIR metrics. For example, how does a repository allow fairness of data? Does it make it accessible? And also for data sets, for instance, there are efforts to do that, but this would not measure it at the institutional level. So this is not foreseen. I think this would also be really too early to start anything like this. There are maturity models for research data management for institutions that are, I think, very interesting to look at if you work at a university and you want to think about, okay, how can we build additional services and support? I think these are very interesting to look at, really to systematically think about what are we supporting in terms of infrastructure, training, and also policies for research data management.
Thanks, Leonard. And the next question, which kind of had 12 votes, I'm taking based on the people who are in the highest votes here. And I'm going to start with Mustafa on this one, if that's okay. Do you think the FAIR data should be accompanying a PhD thesis? So I think the question here is trying to get to what extent should data or FAIR data principles be explicit within the thesis. So I'm going to maybe go to you and see, one, should it, and maybe then how could it? Which is, it's all very fine saying let's do this, but to what extent is that actually feasible?
So thanks a lot for the question. Yes, I think it should be integrated. I think there was another question below down that when the researcher, or whether it should be part of even the undergraduate level. I think the basic concept, if we don't train the students, then when they become researchers, they would not know about it. So it's better to start as early as possible, at least the basic concept. And when we are talking about the implementation, for example, in PhD, yes, the short answer is yes, it should be. Now, how much it is, it will depend on the topic, but not only the topic, also the sectors, because in academia, the data is handled differently than in industry. So if someone is doing PhD in industry, there might be some issues. The FAIR data is the basic principle is pretty simple, as Leonard said, and that as open as possible. If needed, it's closed. So there should not be any issue there. I just want to point out another issues. The previous question about this H4S4R, similar like that. the labeling labeling like that, it's good, but we need to see how much in reality those are being implemented. Yes, being the organization who has more than 17,000 researchers, we even heard a lot of stories. Forget about even the FAIR data, even the open science, which is kind of a guideline right now in a lot of European projects. It's a must requirement where supervisors do not encourage it, where institution does not provide support. So as long as we do not do it bottom up, here, not only the policy level, the institutions needs to come up and kind of define the framework, what would be shared if it's a PhD or anything else, how much should be shared, and what is the standard of sharing among the subjects and among the disciplines, as well as the sector. I think this type of labeling will not work. So it's we researcher community with all relevant stakeholders, including the institution, including the funding agencies, need to come into a conclusion.
I think that's a very good perspective. And I think, even pointing towards starting at undergraduate level as well. So that's pretty well maybe a whole institutional approach. It's from the curriculum at undergraduate to the institution, to policymakers and funders. I think that does anybody want to kind of come in on that in terms of, where? So the question was specifically to being part of the PhD, but I think it's probably that's a very specific piece. I think Mustafa has kind of identified the broader piece at institutional level. Does anybody want to kind of come in on or to follow on to comment on that? Any of our other speakers?
Yeah, I can say a few words, because this is also a question that we try to address in FAIR is Fair, to identify actually where do we start with teaching research data management, and then by extension about FAIR data. And I think there is definitely, let's say, some space to start with awareness about the concepts earlier than is probably being done these days, be it about research data management aspects or FAIR data. So it doesn't stop anyone from actually introducing FAIR as a principle, as an idea at a certain time in the bachelor, for instance. It's probably not in the first year that you need to learn about interoperability necessarily, but actually you need to know the concept of interoperability, for instance, or what is actually metadata. It doesn't hurt to learn that, and then you can say actually in next steps when you apply these skills, for example, in a master program, then yeah, you should think about actually when you do a thesis, what does it mean to make data interoperable? Because then that's a relatively, let's say, easy step, in my opinion, that could be done. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to make their data fair, because that's like a very big expectation. But also, I think some universities, when we looked at research data policies, they actually say that the data even produced by students should be handled according to the data management policy. Doesn't mean that it has to be fair, but it does mean that they need to make it a little bit of a data management plan. And that's probably an extreme in a way, but it's definitely not, let's say, unheard of that some universities even include student data from student projects to a certain extent within their data policy. So short answer is yes, there is some space to incrementally increase, I think, awareness, and also, then the practical application of some aspects at the undergraduate or the master level.
Thank you. Oh, Ellen, yes?
If there's time, I'd like to add some views from the University of Oslo, or my views of the University of Oslo perspective. I think you're right. We actually do have master programs that require data management plans to be submitted as part of the sort of process, which I think is quite nice. And then they start thinking more about how the data managed at the end as well. I think one thing that we emphasize in Oslo, just because you need to see that change of attitude that I mentioned, and just let people get used to the idea of sharing, because we've had some conversation with ethnographers recently, and for them the idea of sharing is really quite foreign, and so we introduced the FAIR principles and concepts, but we actually talk more about how can you work effectively as a researcher with your data? How can you avoid losing your own data? Because we see these horror stories about people who do that, and try and keep it quite practical, and try and focus on the benefits for the individual researchers. And then if they sort of follow the principles that we teach, it will actually get a lot easier to make the data fair and follow through on funder requirements and so on at the end of a project. So that's sort of the take that we have on this.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very nice way to conclude. And the input from our speakers is a very practical piece of how to. So I want to thank our audience for being with us today. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something in terms of the implementation of FAIR that you can take to your own institutions. I would like to thank our speakers, Ellen, Lennart, Mustafa, and David, for their contributions. I think we've kind of taken this webinar today from starting at a very high level EU policy down into an institutional level, then considering it from the individual researchers, their needs and their barriers, on the perspective of the funders, which is a very kind of those 4 presentations I think should give you as members of our research community and some understanding of FAIR and how it should be operating within our communities. Also, just to draw your attention that 3 of our speakers have extended presentations on the YouTube channel, which I think will give you even more additional information on the topic area that they addressed here today. And just to finish and conclude, yet again, to thank our speakers. I have learned a lot. I had the pleasure of listening to the different presentations before this webinar started, and I too will be taking some top tips, hopefully back into my own institution. So thank you, everybody, and I wish you the very best for the rest of your day.